right, guys, welcome to another episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. I'm your host, Dr. Rady Rahban, and we have a very happy ending story that wasn't so happy. I'm really honored to have our guest on today because she's actually not my patient. And usually when we have people on the show, they're people that we have taken care of in one capacity or another. But in this instance, our guest today had what I thought was a really, albeit initially tragic story, one that turned out to be very good, but very, very educational. And I think it would be very worthwhile for everybody to listen. And I'm grateful that she's on the show. It's about rhinoplasties, ethnic rhinoplasties, revision ethnic rhinoplasties. So you're going to want to listen into this episode because I think it's going to be really fascinating. So welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you.
With a double S. She's not messing around. It's a double S. So we got to know Lisa because Lisa is actually a patient of ours now. It's a lie. Through our wellness med spa part of our practice, but we've never had the honor of operating on Lisa. Yet when we spoke, she had a story which I thought would be really, really worthwhile telling. So Lisa went to a doctor, and this is why I thought this story was really useful, because what happened to Lisa in regards to her nose happens all the time. And I mean all the time, because it's a slow and gradual slippery slope to a bad outcome. And the reason that is that Lisa was going to see a doctor here in Beverly Hills, reputable, well-trained, everything that you think. So go ahead and delete the idea that Lisa went to some strip mall in Vegas or whatever. Top notch, great social media presence, great reviews, everything. So eliminate that. And she was seeing this doctor, and she decided to go to this doctor for, I think it was a buccal fat removal and submental lipo.
Yes.
Straightforward. So she goes in has this surgery. How long ago was that surgery?
4 years. So it was December of 2020.
So December of 2020, she goes and has this procedure done. Buccal fat removal, which is removing the small amount of egg yolk type fat within your cheeks, because some people have fuller cheeks, and a little bit of liposuction under the neck, straightforward. And the surgery was amazing. It was successful. Everything went fantastic, no complication. At that point, now that she's developed a rapport and has a relationship with her doctor, she went ahead and said, hey, by the way, doc, what do you think about my nose? It's a little thick, it's a little wide, it's a little flat. It's an ethnic nose. I'm African American. And what do you think? And the doctor went on to say, no problem. We can fix this. No issue. We can knock this out. I'll make this great. And you had told me that, he seemed very confident. And naturally, you didn't go completely blind. So you checked a few before and afters. But error number one. So error number one was that you, and I mean this with great respect. I'm not saying that this was your fault.
Oh, I own it. I own it completely.
Error number one, and I want to dictate it this way because you can, as a listener, make sure these things don't happen. Error number one is just because you went to a doctor in whom you have great relationship with, who did an amazing breast aug, tummy tuck, facelift, doesn't mean that that doctor necessarily is going to do a great job at something else, because noses and faces and breasts are all very different. Now, I happen to do everything, and I would like to believe that the things that I do well, but maybe someone goes on there, did their breast surgery with me, and doesn't love my noses. Fair enough. So error number one is that you did look at some of his photos, but on your own admission, you didn't see a lot of quote unquote ethnic noses.
Correct. There
right?
were none. There were absolutely none.
So there wasn't like 4 black women,
No.
or 6 Latinos,
No.
or 7 Asian women.
None.
So
None.
what you did, which was great, and you had told me this, is let's define what the hell ethnic means. And so people are so misled. Ethnic rhinoplasty does not mean that you're not a white person. Let's go over that again. Ethnic rhinoplasty does not mean that you're ethnic. Ethnic rhinoplasty means you have thick skin. The end. So often, if you are ethnic, black, Asian, Latino, Middle Eastern, Greek, whatever, you have thicker skin. But are there Latinos who have thin skin? Sure. So they are not technically an ethnic rhinoplasty. The reason the term was originated is because when you have thick skin, you need to use a totally different approach to a rhinoplasty than a thin skinned person. But over the years, that has been completely lost. And in the advertisement, it means that I do noses on people who are of other ethnicities. Correct?
Correct. I was completely ignorant to all of that. So I saw people who I thought had wide noses, right, like mine, and he had made them look good. They looked natural, and I thought, okay, he can do mine. Nope, this will be a piece of cake for him. He's already done this. Had no idea that skin texture was a factor.
Right. And nor would you do now, because everyone becomes an expert after the fact. But that's part of the reason why physicians need to communicate and articulate things. So nonetheless, you go, you have your first rhinoplasty, and it's okay. It's not terrible. It's not, oh my God, amazing, but it certainly was acceptable. And like all rhinoplasties, all, ethnic, non-ethnic, whatever, it doesn't matter who the surgeon is, noses change. And all noses, especially thicker ones, take longer to settle. And all noses, when they settle, will have irregularities in them, asymmetries in them. Things will not look the way they did 6 months ago, 1 year ago. And as time goes on, those issues will continue to change. And that's universal. So, of course, naturally, 2 years later, the swelling on your nose is kind of going down. And you notice, that's odd. My nostrils are looking more asymmetric.
Yes, especially in photos.
Right.
You see yourself in a photo and you go, oh, wait, that does not look cute at all. And it's
Right.
visible from every angle. You can't cover it with makeup. There's no tricks. It's definitely, like you said, settled at this point.
So first thing you notice is my nostrils look more asymmetric than I ever remember them being. And secondly is my nose is still pretty thick and kind of rubbery, right?
Exactly.
It still has a real it's still thick skin. Okay.
Exactly.
So you go back to your original surgeon.
Go back to original surgeon. He looks at me and he says, you know what? You're right. I could have taken your tip down a little bit more. I could have narrowed the dorsum a little bit more. And yeah, the nostrils, definitely see what you're talking about. Let's go back in. So the only thing I'm going to charge you for is to break your nose again, because I've got to break your nose again to narrow the dorsum, and that's it. It's a piece of cake. Never mentioned anything about a second surgery being more complex. He actually kind of understated it. And so I said, okay, great. So we scheduled the second surgery for May of 2022.
Okay. So the good thing is that you did wait the 2 years. This story would have gone super sideways if you would have done everything that you did except you went in within 3 or 4 months. So you waited the 2 years. Every single revisional rhinoplasty is more difficult than the first one. It doesn't matter who the surgeon is. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter. Because there is now a boatload of scar tissue.
See, he never mentioned that.
Furthermore, the anatomy is all jacked up. It's not like you go in and everything is beautiful and glistening and like in a textbook. Everything is just wadded together. And the surgery is always more complicated. So much so that when patients of my own want a revision, unless the issue is so goddamn glaringly obvious, I will advise them not to. Not because I don't want to make it 3% better or 6% better. It's because I know that I can go in there, open up a can of whoop ass, and then come out going, God, fuck, this is a disaster. So 20 years in this, doing a ton of noses, I know that the only time it's worth revising something is if the benefit far outweighs the risk. So when I have a patient with a small issue, which I know they're gonna have, I won't go back and open up the whole nose for a tiny issue. So nonetheless, you go in, you do the surgery.
Yes.
It was supposed to be, as you said, a chip shot. You awaken from anesthesia and you're in horror.
I was. I woke up and nobody was really there except there was one nurse, and she was yelling at me that I wasn't waking up fast enough for her because she had another patient. So she's yelling at me, "You need to wake up, you need to wake up." And I mean, I couldn't walk, of course, like I couldn't do anything for myself. So she puts me in a wheelchair. We go down to where my friend is waiting for me in the car. I basically just got thrown into the car. And even my friend was like, "What the hell was that? Like, what was her problem?" I said, "I don't know. I'm completely out of it." And as you are, you're just waking up from anesthesia. It takes a while to kind of come back to yourself. So later on that day, the doctor texts me and says, "Everything went great, but I couldn't get your nostrils symmetric. I tried," and he sends me a picture. So I look at it. I don't know what I'm looking at because again, you're just out of surgery. You're not really thinking clearly. So he did say they weren't symmetric, and I didn't even have the strength to be upset at that point until, of course, the bandages came off.
Right. So bandages come off is the first time you see that on the right side of your nose, there's an area that's black, maybe the size of a jelly bean, right? So it's not tiny. It's not a little dot.
Yeah.
It's arguably like half the side of your right side of your nose is black. And you look in the mirror and tell me, like, what goes through your mind when you take off the bandages, assuming that the nose is going to be a little better than it was.
Yeah.
You'll totally, of course, naturally, the nostrils, you were told, but you went in for two reasons. One, fix your nostrils. Two, make your nose a little narrower and thinner.
Correct.
Okay,
That's
so
correct.
you look in the mirror and what happens?
So cast off day, I get the bandages off, and it's basically down to the white meat, as people would say. So there was no skin there. There was just a wound, and the doctor smiling in my face, telling me everything went great. And I'm going, "What is this?"
Right. Like, let's talk about the elephant on my nose.
He said, "Oh, it's just an erosion." And I didn't even know what that really meant in a medical context, right?
Sure.
I didn't know that he made it sound like this was a normal occurrence.
Yeah, 1 out of every 4 of them have this thing.
And that, don't worry about it. And this was, I think we're about 90% there. And I can definitely now see my nostrils are even worse than they were before. So not only do I have this wound on the side of my nose, I now have even more asymmetric nostrils, and I'm super swollen, and I can't even believe it. But the doctor's smiling in my face, telling me everything is going to be okay. So at that point, I go home and I realize that this erosion was now bleeding and pussing. So there was definitely an issue, and I went back to him a few days later. He said, "I don't think this is an infection." I'm like, "Well, yeah, but it's yellow. Everybody knows if it's a weird color that there's probably something wrong." So there was yellow pus coming out. It was bleeding. And after weeks of this, it wasn't just days, it was weeks of this. I go back to him and he says, "Okay, I'm going to send you to hyperbaric chamber. I'm going to cover it."
Weeks later.
This was weeks later. So he pays for 3 hyperbaric chamber sessions. And that was what finally began the healing process.
Right. It started scabbing up and closing.
Exactly. So, I don't even have time to be upset about my nostrils. I'm just trying to make the right side of my nose stop leaking. And so that worked. So the hyperbaric worked. Now I'm back in his office where we've got mirrors in my face, and I'm going, "Okay, what about these nostrils?" Because this is what we went in there for, and I'm still really unhappy. And he said, "Okay, he said, I'm not going to touch your nose again for a while. I can't." I said, "I totally understand that." He said, "The only thing I might do later on is I might lift up I guess it's the alar rim."
The alar rim, yeah.
And, we'll maybe do an adjustment there, but I can't do anything else in the meantime. So then, of course, I'm telling him how upset I am, and he goes, "All right, I can probably put filler there. Let's do a little bit of filler, and I can make the notched nostril look a little bit more round with the filler." So me not knowing any better, I'm looking at an expert telling me that this is a solution.
Sure.
I agreed to it. I agreed to have the filler placed. So he puts the filler in, and immediately blood is gushing out. I didn't, of course, know, but that is a sign that a blood vessel has been hit. Yes. So I, he gives me a tissue. I hold it up to the nostril, and I look in the mirror, and I'm like, okay, it does look a little bit better. Thank you. I think I could live with this now. That was a Friday. By Sunday, my nose was on fire.
Right.
And I've had filler before, so I know that the first night it stings a little bit, you're a little sore, but I knew something was super weird by Saturday night because it just felt like tightness. There was
Right.
just this extreme tightness of the nose. And then by Sunday morning, I had that reticulated triangular rash, I guess you would call it. And then I reached out to the surgeon and said, something's very wrong.
Right.
And he said, come to my office immediately. I rush over to his office, and he says, I'm going to have to dissolve you. So imagine I'm already sore, I'm already in a lot of pain, and he has to dissolve this filler. And there was no local anesthetic given to me or anything like that. It was probably one of the most painful experiences of my life, but he had to put the hyaluronidase.
The hyaluronidase, yeah.
Hyaluronidase, and he dissolved the filler. And then at this point, I think he realized, okay, we're heading to necrosisville, so you've got to go to hyperbaric today. And it's a Sunday, so I got to figure out where to go and get hyperbaric on a Sunday. Then he gave me, there's a gel that they use for heart patients.
Nitro paste?
Yes, so he prescribes that. I've got to try to figure out where to get that. And we're just in Operation Save My Nose at this point. So thankfully, all of those things worked. But very, very traumatic experience.
Right. So what are the learning points? Okay. So why on earth did you have a hole in the side of your nose when you woke up? The reason you had a hole in the side of your, let's back up to the original catastrophe.
100%.
Before we get to the second catastrophe. The reason you had a hole on the side of your nose is that when this surgeon went to open up the skin of your nose to get in there and do whatever, imagine the hood of the car, because of all the scar tissue and because of all that inflammation that is in everyone's nose, that getting into the right plane, it becomes very difficult. It's like a cement block, and you're trying to navigate your way through it. And I'm certain that he poked a hole through the side of your nose. Furthermore, he was too superficial. And so the danger of thinning the skin of a thick-skinned person. So let's back up. When you open up the nose of a person who has thick skin, in addition to the skin itself being thick, they have a lot of fatty tissue. They actually have fat in their nose. Whereas if I'm a thin-skinned person, I have no fat in my nose. And you can very judiciously remove a little bit of that fat trying to thin out the nose. The reason you can't be more aggressive is because the blood supply to the skin is in that layer. And so if you're too aggressive trying to thin the skin of an ethnic nose, you will cause necrosis. So if you are in the wrong plane and very superficial because you can't see anything because you're in the dark with all scar tissue, you're going to incidentally and accidentally get too superficial and poke a hole through it. And so that's how that happened. When that wound healed, because you're African American, and the photos you showed me, it turned into a massive, hypertrophic, dark scar. So it's not like a wound on your leg that just finally heals. It's not just that the hole healed. The hole healed with a nasty scar. So that's issue number one. That's why, in general, I don't like to thin out ethnic skin in general. And furthermore, again, reiterating, it's not such a cakewalk to go back into a revision nose. That takes care of that. Then the issue that occurred is that your nose is now fully compromised. How far out from your rhinoplasty, your revision, did you inject the filler?
4 months.
Okay.
It was 4 months.
So it wasn't terribly soon, but that nose is not happy. And it's super tight. The envelope is like brick. And when you put filler in, the only way filler works in a nose is for it to be pushed in, and the area you're pushing in has to receive it. So when you put filler in a tip or a nostril, not at the top of the bridge where it's loose and moves, but in the tip and the nostril, it's very, very tight. and you have to use a fair amount of force to get it in, and you're pushing greatly. And what happened in your instance, whether he actually hit a vessel and or not, you occluded the blood vessel, the blood supply to the tip of your nose. Because when you have a rhinoplasty, the blood supplies to your skin comes from the sides and from the bottom. And when the bottom is cut, you rely exclusively to the sides. And so what you had was impending necrosis of the tip of your nose, which is a incredibly scary process, both for the patient and more so for the doctor. You lose the skin of your nose, game over. That's why I don't let nurses inject tip noses during fillers. And you want to come in, you want to get your lip filled? No problem. Charlene's more than happy to help you. You want to get your nose filled? Hell no. Why? Because it's not a matter of skill. It's about the anatomy and the potential risk. So the treatment is all hands on deck. You have to reverse it, which you did. You have to get high level of blood flow going through, which was hyperbaric you did. I don't know if necessarily the nitro paste helps. We just, as plastic surgeons, slap that on whenever we're worried. And you got lucky and you survived. And everything went, at least, because that could have been a game over.
Yeah.
You would have never survived that one. The black hole in your nose on the side, you can sort of survive. Losing the tip of your skin of your nose, there's no coming back from that. Okay, so, all right. Knockout number 3 from so the story doesn't end there, ladies and gentlemen.
It's not over. So we are in 2022 at this point, and it's late 2022, and I'm interviewing for jobs. I have a real life. I have a very visible job and career, so I was in panic mode because I was working remotely for, the last 2.5, 3 years during the pandemic. And then now I've got to go back to an office. And this happened a month before I was due to go back into an office. And, I can't walk around with a filter on my face. I can't,
Right. Yeah.
disguise this in any way, shape, or form. So now I'm freaking out. But the hyperbaric definitely made a difference. And then, I did wear makeup, and I just had to really take care of my skin because it just started peeling off. So thankfully it did not lose my nose tip, because you see all those pictures online of people that it was too late.
Right.
Right. So if I had waited one more day.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Right.
there's no question that you avoided a true disaster.
Yeah.
So then what happens then? You leave it alone? What do you do?
I left it alone. I said, all right, I'm going to just live with this. And I focused on my career. And then it came to a point where it was starting to affect my self-esteem. Okay. So now because the thing about rhinoplasty is, like you said, everybody says trust the process. So because I didn't have anybody to look to say, oh, they went through this too, and this is how it's going to turn out, I'm kind of just going through life thinking, well, maybe this, will heal perfectly and nobody's ever going to know. And maybe this dent will miraculously fill itself. You have no idea kind of where the road's going to lead. But after 2 years, you can kind of see where you're at. So I decided that I needed to research a surgeon to do my third surgery, because I just couldn't live with the 2 areas of, that were not attractive, okay, for my own personal preferences. So that is where things get very complicated, because just to find someone to take a case like this, very, very difficult. Okay, so that's number one. It's who's going to do this, who's going to want to operate for a third time on a thick-skinned patient who already had a lot of trauma to the nose. So this means I have to look everywhere. That means researching international, researching out of state, looking at lots of pictures, lots of consultations, and the thing that we don't talk about is cost, right?
Sure, no, that's a very big. This is just. I mean, people think this happens in a vacuum. It absolutely doesn't.
Yeah. So I think that was the big lesson too. Is this is going to be expensive no matter who I go to, and I got to get this right. So I can't. As unhappy as I am, I have to take my time. And I have to really, really be sure that I want to do this again, and that I select the right surgeon. So that meant looking at lots of different surgeons that maybe didn't look like me. Because I think the first mistake I made was I thought that if somebody was brown skinned, they knew how to handle my skin.
Sure.
That was
No.
mistake number one.
Which, by the way, is not an unreasonable thing for you to have thought. I actually think that that's not you. If you want, as for example, if you're African American and you want to go to a hairdresser, you better go to an African American hairdresser because she's going to know your hair and how to manage your hair because it is absolutely different than a Japanese person's hair. And an African American nose is absolutely different than a non African American nose. But in this instance, just because the surgeon necessarily is dark skinned doesn't mean necessarily that they work on dark skin. The number one thing that tells you they work on dark skin is their gallery. And you have to see a ton of dark skinned people with similar features to say, not that this is guaranteed, but that, okay, now I'm starting to see this person does a lot of these. So I think that's kind of very, very important to understand. So you did your homework, you did all that, and you're actually, drum roll, 5 weeks out from your third and final
Yes.
revision. Why I can say final is because your nose looks good. And the reason your nose looks good is, yes, your surgeon was skilled. And yes, your surgeon knew what he was doing. But it's because they used the correct technique. Notice that. Isn't that interesting? That if you address the problem with the correct solution, the outcome should be positive. And what do I mean by that? So here is what the whole distinction and divide is. When you operate on traditional skinned noses, say noses that are medium to thin skinned, you are managing the cartilage and you are managing the bone. The skin is there for the ride. The skin is there to oh wow, look how good everything looks. Just put the skin down. The skin's irrelevant. The skin will shrink wrap over whatever you did. Okay? It's not going to add anything. It's not going to attract anything. It's just going to do whatever you ask it to do. When you deal with ethnic, quote unquote, thick-skinned people, you are operating on the skin. You are trying to make the skin do what you need it to do. So if you make a shitty little structure underneath it and the bone and the cartilage are weak and they don't have a lot of projection to them, and then you put this big old carpet over it, it will swallow up your work. And then when the scar tissue kicks in, you'll be left with absolutely no different. You as a surgeon could have patted yourself on the back and be like, oh my God, look at this incredible thing that I made. Wow, wow, wow. And then you put the skin over, and then in 6 months, I know this because this is the learning curve that it took me to get there, because everyone has to learn. And when you begin, you don't really appreciate how aggressive thick-skinned results, how aggressive the skin is in a thick-skinned person. So the only way to treat a thick-skinned person is to put in solid, large, big ass, strong pieces of cartilage. Because you have to push the skin out so the skin thins out and looks and behaves accordingly. So here's the best analogy. If you have a windbreaker that's super thin, you can put that on a small child and it will look like the child. If you have a mink coat and you put that on a small child, it will swallow up the small child. The only person that looks good in a mink is a tall, big, broad shoulder person because they're wearing the mink out. And so you had a rib graft revision rhinoplasty. And so when you are ethnic, aka thick-skinned person, your own septum is garbage. It's thin, it's floppy. Your own cartilage, the cartilage on the tip of your nose, is wobbly and thin. So you must borrow cartilage in order to build a legit structure. And you can't do that from septum, and you can't do that from ear. You must go get the rib, because the rib is like solid, and when you cut it in, you make into the shapes, it's going to stand like a flag post. And when you do that and you build the shape you like, and then you put the skin over it, and then you sit patiently, the skin will succumb and it will give into the structure underneath it. And you will then get a more refined, not thin, more refined appearance to your nose. And that's ultimately the goal. Your nose is bigger. Let me repeat that. I want everyone to hear this. Your nose is bigger than your nose was before. I guarantee you, your nose is now bigger than your nose before. Bigger in what sense? It's taller. The bridge has to come up. The tip has to come forward. You need to expand the skin envelope. You need to forget about this idea of having a small, cute nose. That ain't going to happen if you want it to be refined.
And I never wanted that.
But that's really important to understand, because I will tell you, there are patients who will be sitting here looking at your nose and be like, wait, that's way bigger. And yeah, because that's the only way to do this. So if you're not educated or informed, you will find yet another thing you don't like about it. But your nose, projection-wise, is way more projecting. There ain't no other way to do this.
Right. Yeah, and I love it. That's what I was really happy about, actually, because after surgery number 2, I mean, I had like part of my nose was collapsed down. I literally had the Michael Jackson Little Kim nose on one side. So I knew that I wanted it back bigger again, but again, more refined, more structured. So yes, my nose is bigger now, but I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, and then interesting thing is that when your nose gets operated on, especially when you're thick-skinned and it doesn't have structure, your breathing goes to shit. How was your breathing after surgery 1 and 2?
Not good.
Terrible.
Absolutely not good.
And then when you add structure to your nose to make it taller and bigger so the skin looks better, how's your breathing now?
Amazing.
Right. So that shouldn't shock anybody, because when your nose is pushed back, everything collapses. And when everything is brought out and tall, air moves through. So right on to your surgeon. He did a great job because he used the correct technique. And, kudos to you. You managed a very difficult journey, because there are people who have an unattractive feature that you were born with, you can live with. To have an unattractive feature that you paid for, that you went out of your way to get done, and it turns out terrible, is a very, very difficult thing to live with, because people are very frustrated with themselves. I should have never touched this. Family members don't give you a lot of grace. They're not there supporting you because they're like, you should never have touched it. You're vain. You just get plummeted, and it makes people in a dark, very dark hole. And many people don't come out of it. They lose self-esteem and they get worse and worse into a dark hole. So, good for you.
I was really depressed for 2 years. I mean, this emotionally, psychologically, it ruined my life for 2 years. And because I didn't know that this could be fixed even. You don't know these things. You just have to do your research, and you have to, hope that there's somebody that could make it even 10% better, 20% better. I would have even been happy with that.
Sure. And I imagine the dialogue you had with this surgeon was sober. In other words, I don't think this surgeon came to you and said, I got this, you're going to do great, no worry, I do this all the time. Notice the distinction. I want people to listen to these following key components. The more confident your surgeon, the less they know. When I finish a consultation and they go speak to Sally, patients are like, whoa, this guy was just like, he's like, this can go wrong, that can go wrong. I'm not sure. Your nostrils will 100% will be asymmetric. Your nostrils will never be the same. You 1%, 1000% will have issues, blah, blah, blah. Like, this guy, is he trying to not sell me on the surgery? What the fuck? He doesn't even want me to do it. Sally goes, how did it go? I don't know, actually. Because a surgeon who is aware of every aspect and is honest with you will not sell you on the idea. They'll actually tell you, I want to discourage you and only operate on you if you still show up. I'm never going to start. So the more, hey, yo, I got this. It's, no problem. The more problematic the things are. And I think that is a huge lesson to be learned. And I think that, at the end of the day, you did what you did the journey that most people do. It's just, I didn't know. And then it's through revisions that you become educated. So the message here is don't get into a place whereby which you then are desperate to know. Educate yourself on the front end. The last thing you mentioned to me, and I noticed, and it resonated with me, because these are the same patterns. Everything that happened to you happens over again. There's no like, oh, I don't know how this happened to you. It happened to you because, you went in for X and you did Y. You didn't check Y. When you checked Y, there wasn't anything on there. And the surgeon seemed incredibly aloof and very flippant, never seemed very panicked. When you come in and I see a hole in your nose, I'm panicked. You understand? Like, I'm like, oh, that looks bad. We're in trouble. And then the last thing you mentioned was it was reasonably affordable.
Yes, it was. The first one was.
So there you have, they don't make up sayings for no reason. If it's too good to be true, it ain't true.
Yeah.
So if you go in and do a rhinoplasty and you know that very well trained, by the way, just because you're well trained doesn't mean that it gets done, but very well trained, really reputable people are charging $10 and you go get it done at $5, it doesn't mean that it's going to be botched, but when it's botched, don't be surprised.
Yeah, that was the lesson. That was a huge lesson.
And I can't tell you how many people I revise that their first surgery was affordable, which I understand. Don't do the fucking surgery. Yeah. I couldn't afford it. It's not breast cancer.
Right.
It's not like, well, listen, what am I supposed to do? My child is starving. I had to, you don't need it.
Exactly.
Save the money. Do it right.
Exactly.
So there's always this sense, and then I see these comments online, well, if you guys would make it cheaper, I wouldn't have had to go. I went and did shitty surgery because you're too expensive. You're the reason they're blaming you. What?
Yeah.
Anywho.
Well, I mean, and that's a great point because people now are DMing me. They, because I comment, of course, on the surgeon that revised me, and then they want to know all the details, and then they go, well, he's great, but I just don't know about the cost. And I went, you will not remember what you paid, honestly. When you're happy, you will not care. You will not remember what you paid. I promise you.
I promise you, if you and I sat down and you run an area in your work where money is important, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. You know numbers.
100%.
If I sat down and said, here's what it costs for your primary rhinoplasty, and here's your complication, here's your hyperbaric, here's the anesthesia, here's the suffering, here's the loss of work, here's the this, here's the that, here's the hotel, here's the you will be 3 times, it is well documented, you will have been 3 times more costly than had you just gone and paid the right amount the first time. This is not some this is fact.
It is a fact.
So when you can't afford it, you don't do it. I can't afford the newest GT3, blah, 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 blah. So I don't get it.
Exactly.
It's a luxury.
Exactly. So that was lesson 1 is, the price was too good to be true. So I went for it. But I also want people to know that even in the best hands, something can go wrong.
Sure.
And you have to have money for that too. So just set aside money for
100%.
Set aside twice the cost of what you're doing. Make sure you have that as a backup just in case. And, thankfully I was able to do that. But I thought, what would I have done if I couldn't afford this?
Yeah, you would have been in deep, you would have been in deep shit. Yeah. So, well, thank God you managed. You're at a happy place. Yeah. Everything worked out. Yeah. It's a happy story at the end. A little bit of a twisty journey, but you made it. So, at any rate, well, I'm grateful that you came on and you shared your story. I think it's important to keep having these messages. We have these conversations on a regular basis, and you can never discuss it too much. So, well, at any rate, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, awesome. Do us 2 favors, which we ask at the end of every episode. Number 1, if you enjoyed our podcast, go write something nice. We really need the positive reviews. They make everybody who's behind the scenes, everybody super happy. And the second is share the damn show with other people. You're going to all of a sudden have a girlfriend show up and be like, have botched. And you're like, you just should have checked out. And they won't know. So if you love people, pass this show on to other people because it gives them the basis from which to make their own decisions. At any rate, that's a wrap. That's another episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. Your host, Dr. Rady Rahban. See you guys all next week.